All right. I'm going to skip through these couple. In the past, we ended up stopping before 5A. And some of this stuff in this course is kind of it seems to be redundant, as I've noticed. And some of the things that we went over long before might end up being in here again. But that's okay. We'll call it review, yeah. And again, this is the instructions, and this will continue. This will be edited and be put up on Facebook as well, so we can get all that stuff preliminary out of the way. This is the ARRL EC001 course, and I'm going through this because sometimes you need a little bit of extra behind it before you can understand it. Did anybody here in this room have that course taken? Oh, okay, at least 2 did. Okay. Continuing on as we were. These are some of the examples of state and local radio systems, and one of them, in fact, I'll have to expand on a little bit. Police and fire and sheriffs and so forth, they are some of the places we work and will be called on to work on radios. I don't know what SOP is. APCO is ITU and APCO. APCO is the P25 system, and the phonetics, that's something else we're going to cover in this series. 10 codes versus plain language, and why we don't do casual conversations, and the national police frequency. That's also going to be covered in this section here. State and local government radio systems, well, large cities and state police and all of that sort of thing, and fire radios are the ones we're talking about. They have more than one channel assigned to the different purposes. You might have one for tactical, one for the on the scene for the fire people to talk on and so forth. Some for bringing in personnel. And the FCC allocates radio frequencies of different types to agencies, and some have for multi-use agencies. Since this was written, some other things have come into play, and I'll just talk about those a little bit as we get to them. There's a frequency designated for use by the police agencies and may only be used for police business. And that happens everywhere in the country. We have them here, special ones that we use. And the assigned dedicated standardized frequencies, for the medical system, the old one was called MedStar, and they were VHF simplex channels, and they eventually moved up to the UHF channels, the EMRS channels. I think somebody's microphone needs to be muted, Dave. So the med channels, I'm not exactly sure if they're still being used, but I always have them in my scanner, and I do hear things on them. At times when they bring in something new, they'll simulcast on other frequencies. And the new EMRS has 7 VHF simplex channels, not through a repeater system or any kind of complex system. And again, different areas utilize different things. There's the Red Cross has their licensed frequency of 47.42 megahertz. We used to hear that around here, but I think the people who actually understood how to use that are no longer with the Red Cross. Some chapters also have 4750. When we were stationed, when our club, Harrisburg Radio Amateur Club, was at the Red Cross building in Harrisburg, we went looking and found radios and told them that we would happily help them, but then everything fell apart with us and the Red Cross back then. Whether we want to readdress that and find these radios for them, see, they seem to believe after a certain time that the cell phones would be the actual best way to do things, which it's not. And some of the chapters of the Red Cross may rent space on commercial systems or license their own VHF and UHF systems for day-to-day operations. Again, in today, this was written some time ago, but I don't think they do so much anymore in this area. other areas may do that. If they seem to rely on cell phones a lot here. The types of served agency radio systems, dispatch versus operational checks, we're going to cover that. Community repeater systems, trunk repeater systems, and shared simplex. The community repeaters, I actually owned one of these at one time and rented time and space to businesses and to the what is now known as, let's see, what were they called? It was a med unit in northern Dauphin County. I don't recall what they're called now, but they used a shared repeater. CTCSS tones were used for each group on the repeater. So Joe's trucking company could have one slot, the Med 6, that's what it was, would have a slot, and the school buses, which I had on it, they had a slot. That CTCSS tone became known as a PL tone by Motorola, Quiet Channel by GE, and I forget, RCA was a big mobile unit company. They had another name for it, but the term PL tone stuck, and we use that in ham radio as a shortened version of CTCSS right there. So when you're using any shared frequency, repeater or simplex, it's important to press the monitor button for a moment before transmitting. And that disables the PL tone decoder and opens up the channel so you can hear if anybody's on there. Temporarily, you'll hear if anybody's on. And I might point out, too, a lot of people in ham radio rely on those PL tones to quiet their radio so they don't hear the chatter going on until the repeater comes up, or they don't hear the ID on the repeater. They don't hear a lot of stuff that goes on until that repeater comes up. If you're one of those in ham radio that uses your PL tone to quiet your radio, always disable it before you start talking. That way you'll know if you're coming in and it could be somebody talking on the output of it or anything else. You know what's there. But that allows them all these transmissions to be made on the same frequency, but not at the same time. That's a drawback. So in the case of the one that I had school bus drivers that were driving around. They loved to chit chat on the radio. And we had to put a stop to that because when Med 6 came on, they needed to use it. When the trucking company needed it, they needed to be on. And oftentimes on a community repeater, people believe they're the only customer. So what's next? Well, this goes on about the it's continuous tone controlled squelch system. Like it says here, PL for private line, and everybody came up with their own name. You get more than one land mobile customer on the same frequency at almost the same time. Channel guard was GE, quiet channel was RCA, I believe. And call guard, I don't know who used that, but they went by other names. Like I said, Motorola being the big guys, their names stuck. And this gives you an example by graphics of how these different radios can talk to one another or someone else. Trunk systems, I will say I took a little, somebody took a stab at me of something I said about trunk systems last week, or last time we had this class. And I will go on about that a little bit. They allow several low volume users to use a single radio system and several co-located repeaters tied together using computer control. That's the important thing here. They automatically switch to a call to an available repeater. These things have several repeaters on mountains all over the place. We use them in Dauphin County they're used for the Dauphin County fire and ambulance and so forth. They're on a trunk system. Now what happens with the trunk system, once a radio in a group is switched to a new frequency, all the others follow. They are talk groups, and if you're into DMR, DMR has talk groups too. Kind of similar, and the difference is that if you could be broadcasting or transmitting and have a conversation on one repeater, and it changes to a different repeater when you're in a different location, but it follows that talk group so they can all talk to one another. Amateur radio does not currently use this. We use something similar, but not quite in DMR. Now, the thing that I was made fun of, I will say that, when I said that if a trunk system goes down, ham radio becomes the one that takes over. One of the gentlemen in our area said, that's impossible for a trunk system to go down, because if it fails and you're in the whole trunk system, it will go to your local repeater and that will take over and work by itself. That's true. It's site control, because that site now works and all the mobiles can talk in that if they can reach that repeater. If they can't, they're out of the system. So suppose, for example, and I know there's redundancy built into our Dauphin County one. If for some reason the Northern Dauphin County radio falls out of the system and the computer shuts down and you can't get Northern Dauphin County, you can't talk to somebody in the southern part of the county, because there's no way that signal from your radio is going to reach that far without the help of a trunk system. So in that regard, yeah, ham radio comes into play. And I know that this happened. We had a hurricane in Halifax, a tornado rather, actually, that wiped out the Dauphin County end of this system for a while. A local ham who was on his way to perform at a wedding ended up being the communications between the whole system and back to county. That was me. So yeah, I know for a fact it can go down. APCO Project 25, we know it as P25 radios, very flexible. These show up in ham radio use too. It can work as part of a trunk system or as a conventional radio repeater. There are also digital modes that operate. It's excellent audio quality, and it's optional encrypted modes offer message and data security. And the advantage of this one over some of the other ones is any manufacturer almost makes them. And it's not effective in rural or mountain areas, but because of the reception of digital signals, some of that's been improved since then. In Florida, we had a number of ham radio repeaters running P25. It's a good sound because there was a whole lot of P25 stuff dumped by some agency down there, and the hams grabbed it and used it. It's just a different form of modulation of the thing. Never heard of these things called telephones, but apparently you can answer incoming calls and place outgoing calls and answering intercom calls and all the rest of it that we do. We know what it all is. And with some of these, this is true. Keep an owner's manual close at hand for some of these, because they're a little far-fetched how to get to different things. That's just some of the things. Satellite telephones, I've never played with one, but I really wish I had one sometimes. They're becoming more common among served agencies as the cost of ownership of the airtime decreases. They do require line of sight to a satellite, and they aren't cheap, definitely, but they do work. And the satellite data systems are in use by public service agencies. They vary greatly. Two-way data and voice, one-way reception of voice and all that is available on them. And the agency will have to provide training for you how to operate their particular system. It's not one of those things where we can have one size fits all description of them and how to run them. I've run into them. Satellite data systems, emergency managers, weather information network is on it. They provide emergency management community with access to the National Weather Service warnings, watches, and forecasts. We have other ways to get them now that have come into play. And it's a supplement to the other NWS dissemination services, which include NOAA, weather radio, and the wire system, and the family of services, and all the rest of them. It's a supplement for it. Those you won't find out on the street. That's in the EOC usually. And of course, they have other things that we are stuck with learning how to use when we're in a situation where we need to use them. Learn how to use their fax machines and so forth, and their computers as you need to. And I would recommend that those of you who are in a county in this county, we have EOCs set up in every township, in every municipal area. And our ham radio is there. And it wouldn't hurt for you to knock on the door and say, I'm your local ham radio rep, or not rep, but ARES and RACES operator for this area. And, you know, just introduce yourself and then work out something with them to learn what equipment is at your disposal in those particular places. What's that? We, in some of them you do, yeah. Now, Dauphin County, the main one at 911 Gibson Boulevard, you can't just walk in. Yeah, that one you can't go to. But the ones at your local community are in a building like this. In fact, these are downstairs. In this building, we have them. And they are also they can be at the dumbest places. For the longest time in Halifax, where I am, they were in the garage where the snow plows were parked. Why? I have no idea. They're moved out of there now, and they're in the fire department where they should have been in the first place.
Are they also in hospitals?
Hmm?
We have radios in hospitals?
We do have radios in hospitals. That's called, that's done in, what's it? HERES, that's it, yeah. What that means, it's not HERES, theirs, HERES. So I don't know what HERES means. Hospital, I bet, is the first one. What is it? That sounds right, hospital emergency. You made that up. Okay, well, we'll go with that. That looks good. And how you can monitor their systems, obviously on scanners, analog trunking scanners. You can get all these at your local Radio Shack. Well, no. You can't go to Radio Shack for them. You used to be able to. And P25 digital systems, you can find the scanners. I bet they have them on Amazon, though. They got everything there. Now, and going beyond amateur radio, EMCOM volunteers may be asked to use the agency's own communication systems, and they often do, and when it's really necessary. And actually in the TMI drills, occasionally they have called us and say, hey, come over here and run this radio, mostly because they don't know how to run a radio. But that's, we've been brought into it. Most service agency will have their own communication system and equipment ranging from simple to complex. They actually, you know, that's a very true statement. And work with the served agency well in advance to determine whether the agency will need you to use the equipment or under what conditions. That falls into what I just said. You should check in with your local, and at times there will be people there who never heard of what we do, and there are others who have, and you just have to let them know what you do. And the on-air procedures will definitely be different in their radios than what they are on ours, and training drills will make us better at it. And your locals may allow you to come in and sit in with the training. I know that there are training drills that happen through Dauphin County periodically, like every other month or so. And if they usually don't want us in the EOC at Dauphin County during them, but if they also include something that includes the outside, out surrounding areas, you can get into them. Okay, let's get into the typical questions. These are, if you're taking the course, you would run into these. When EMCOM team members are called upon to operate on a public safety radio system, which of the following may they not do? Anybody? They may not engage in casual conversations. And you shouldn't be engaging in casual conversations when you're running an emergency net during an emergency too, on ham radio. But which of the following modes and devices would not be appropriate for you to use to transmit a message for a served agency? Email, computer with internet connections, fax machine, landline telephone, or all these. Well, it's all of them are appropriate and usable if needed. And Which of the following best describes the newer emergency medical radio services? 10 UHF and 7 VHF channels, 10 simplex on VHF with pulse tone encoders for each hospital, or 7 UHF duplex frequencies and 10 VHF, well, that was old, and the MedStar systems. So it is 10 UHF duplex channels and 7 VHF, which we just covered that. And which of the following statement is true about trunk systems? Trunk systems are able to operate without the use of computer controllers. The number of frequencies on a trunk is always a multiple of 10. Amateur radio does not currently use this system, and most trunk systems have ample reserve capacity. It's true. Amateur radio does not currently use it. And when EMCOM teams work with a served agency, a number of assumptions are made, which of the following assumptions are true. Amateur radio operators can operate any communication equipment they encounter. There are no significant differences between amateur radio operating procedures and the procedures used by the served agency. Served agencies must provide training if amateur radio operators are to use their stuff efficiently, and all phonetic alphabets are essentially the same and thus interchangeable. No, served agencies must provide training. Otherwise, we wouldn't know what we're doing. So now let's go on to the next one. B. The fun part, working directly with the public. And who do you go with? The Neighborhood Watch System, Community Emergency Response Team, or CERT, Local Disaster Response Training and Preparedness Classes, DHS, FEMA, ICS, etc. And yes, this is what we do. The Family Radio Service and GMRS, I used to look at them as CB radios for UHF and VHF. They kind of are. And you'll hear, when you listen on them, you'll hear a lot of kids driving around with their bicycles, talking to one another on them and all that. But they do come in handy when you have a problem. There's no license needed for family radio service. GMRS does require license. 5-year term, one license covers the whole family, and I understand they're about $75. If anybody's got, anybody have one of them? How much are they? Or didn't you get a license? No, they used to be high. So, and channel numbering is not standardized. They go by frequencies. What's that? Oh, they do have channel numbers for them. GMRS, okay. Neighborhood groups use them. What are they called? They're not preppers. They're oath keepers. They use them. They're kind of preppers. But FRS and GMRS, very limited coverage. Plan ahead coverage maps for all the users. Find out who can go. Now, if they are simplex related, find out what your range is and who you can send messages to along your coverage area. That's really the best way. Are the ones we buy at Cabela's capable of doing repeaters, though? I have several that are GMRS too in the same radio, and they won't split for a repeater. But of course, Bofangs do. And that's what everybody's going with now, actually, as far as I know.
There's a weekly method that React Group conducts people on that. Very well done.
Huh.
So it's not
not what it used to was. Oh, that's good to know. Not like it used to was. Protocol for radio, basic practices. We're going to go over here, tactical call signs, you first, then me, short messages, pro words, and clear speak. Do not yell into the microphone. and do not directly talk into the microphone, and avoid noisy locations. All those are common sense, but let's break them down. Be aware of the amateur radio operators in your area. Set realistic expectations and get to know the formal emergency organizations, which is what we are. And of course, this is written for people coming into it. And not only us, there's York, there's one developing in Perry County. They're springing up everywhere. Lebanon, Lancaster, and so forth all have an ARES unit. Community emergency response team, the CERT teams, they will educate you about disaster preparedness if you join one of these organizations. They train in light search and rescue. The IS 317 is your introduction to CERT, and it involves classroom training. And I know some of the guys that are in our group have done that. Again, this was a very short version of this. So, which the following is not good practice for FRS? We'll just, if you read through them, it is speaking loudly and directly into the microphone. That goes with any radio. Don't scream into the microphone. It'll distort and nobody will hear you. And also, by the same token, don't speak too quietly either. You gotta modulate that signal. Modulate. Which group might an amateur radio contact about community preparedness efforts? I would say all of the above. CERT is. Gee, they highlighted this one. I'm going with B. Let's spin that sucker. There we go. Operating term, ICS protocols. And then we're done with this session. Any comments or anything from anybody before we move on? Hey, what? Oxcom. We are kind of it, I think. We are there others other than that you know of?
It seems like some counties list that as going along with areas or separately.
Oh, I'm not aware of that here. I think that's what we kind of take up in auxiliary communications. Okay, session 2. We're going into session 6. Is it just me or is the floor shaking? I feel the floor shaking over here. I must be under there's something with a bad bearing underneath this floor. Get the CERT team, we're having an earthquake over here. Okay, getting a message to the intended recipient. Of course, you want to take your time at it and don't be accurate. Sure, we'll get into this here. Listening is at least 50% of what we're supposed to do, and that's the most important thing because we often listen and don't hear. So that's the problem. We write, read, and talk the rest of the time. Why is listening efficiency low? And this is just human nature. You hear what you want to hear. You're juggling too many things. Your mind is going off in different directions with tangents. You get bored sometimes and daydream, and you don't like the person speaking and forming a response. You're thinking about what you're going to say. What? You weren't listening. And you don't understand the topic. You don't want to be here, and so forth. These are, and you're too interested in physical characteristics. I don't know what that's supposed to say, but we'll see. Talk across the mic rather than into it. And one of the other ones, I was in front of a microphone, so I showed that. It reduces the breath noises and popping that you get when, and it can also, all those noises can mask your speech. That's true no matter what microphone you're using and so forth. You got to do that. One subject at a time in your messages. Has to be brief and clear. You don't want to give a long dissertation when you're trying to pass a message. It's got to be in plain language. Don't use codes and ciphers and say QSL and all that. It's got to be plain language. Phonetics or phonics, you can use phonics to explain and phonetics to do it. Pro words are, I have mixed feelings on pro words. I'm going to go in with that. Pro words in emergency communications can help in a lot of ways to bring a message clearer. However, leave them there. Don't bring them into your day-to-day communications of ham radio. Over, out, QSL, all that. Avoid all that. Don't copy that when you're on normal ham radio talking to somebody in a repeater. It makes you sound like a lid, which is a unfortunate thing. But when you're doing messages, when you're conducting messages and so forth, then you can use pro words. What are pro words? Well, we just went over some of them. Roger, there is no Wilco. That's a movie thing. So there's just some of those. We will have a list, right? You're working on that, or we're going to work on that together or something?
Yeah, we're working on training for radiographing. It has pro words in it and description.
Okay. And that's going to be on with the Monday Night Net. We're going to be doing a little bit of getting into some of that on the Monday Night Net. If you didn't know about it, it'll be message handling for a while on that net. Tactical call signs are good to use as well, because the tactical call sign, you could say shelter 1, this is base or whatever you want to call it, and give every shelter a shelter number. It's quicker and easier to know who you're talking to, and it also avoids when the shift changes and some new operator is in, you don't have to figure out who that is that's at that location at that time. So there are some of the state EOC nets, Firebase 1 and so forth, all tactical call signs that you would use. What about FCC call signs? Of course, you have to, as a ham, you have to identify at 10-minute intervals during a conversation and at the end of your last transmission. And in these situations, you don't know if you're going to be coming back in 10 minutes. So after you carry on your business, this is shelter 1, WB3BKN, and sign it that way and clear. I didn't use W5TSN because I don't know who he is and I don't want to impersonate him. So any comments or questions for anybody online or here in person before we go on? Okay. And of course the questions. In emergency communications, which one of the following is not true? Let's go with A. Listening is only about 10%. That is not true. It's most of it. It's 30, half of it. Half of what you do is listen. Which of the following procedures is best when using a microphone? Hold the microphone just off the tip of your nose. Okay, it is talk across it rather than into it. In EMCOM, which of the following is true? Never use 10 codes on amateur radio. Use Q signals on served agencies. Under no circumstances, use Q signals on a CW net. And I'll use technical jargon when you feel it's appropriate. Well, of course, it's never use 10 codes on the amateur radio. And don't say Big 10-4 either. Which of the following is always true of a tactical net? Personal call signs are never used. Personal call signs are always used, preferred over tactical. Personal call signs are required at 10-minute intervals during a conversation or at the end of your last transmission. And personal call signs are required at 10-minute intervals during and at the end. That's the one it is, the last one there. Which of the following is the most efficient way to exchange Which of the following is the most efficient way to end an exchange on a tactical net? They say give your call sign, and I would agree with that. And we're moving on to 7. Any questions online or here in person before we move on? Let's see. Then we're at 6. Moving on to 7. Okay, I hope audio is coming through okay and pictures are coming through. Dave, can you address that for me before we go on? Dave fell asleep. Okay, basic net operations.
It's coming through.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, everything's good. It just takes a moment for me to get unmuted.
I'll scoot. Okay, why do we have nets? It's a group setting in multiple locations, bringing orderliness to chaos. Okay. And net operations, you have the net manager, NCS, and the first operator on the scene. Well, let's dig into that. Net types, open, formal, open, informal, no net control station, and a few stations. That's just kind of the way an informal one, open one works. Directed has a net control station, takes check-ins, and they use tactical call signs at a directed net. This is in the emergency types. Examples of net formats, informal nets, interest group nets, swap nets, and training nets. These are informal. Formal nets are traffic nets like we are going to be experiencing on Mondays on the 145.11 repeater here in Harrisburg in the evening at 7. Emergency nets started after a request for service has been submitted by a served agency through an appointed local amateur radio emergency coordinator. And at that time, I play that part. When they want us, they call, and then we spring into action. Traffic net, resource net, tactical net, information net, health and welfare nets are some of the net that we will be doing. And that was it. And I should back up and go over them. Traffic net is passing messages. Resource nets are the ones that control where the stuff is coming from, trucks and people and so forth. Tactical nets, we covered this. I forget, I'm drawing a blank. That's, and the information net, I know that is, that's where you pass your information around. Health and welfare is about actually the health and welfare of people. Aunt Maud goes to one of the people at one of the shelters and says, I have to get a message to so-and-so, and that's what health and welfare is. Any questions from anybody before we go on? Okay, which of the following requires no net control station to control the nets? An open net does not need a net control operator. Which of the following is true of a directed nets? There's minimal direction from the net control. There is no clearly assigned mission. They serve only the liaison nets between several simultaneous nets, or they're used when the volume of traffic is too great to be handled on a first come, first served basis, and that's it. That's your directed nets. When it reaches a point where you can't just have an open net, then you change it. Often that happens. Who's responsible for ensuring a smooth flow of traffic? The net manager. And which type of net would handle non-formal communications to a served agency? That's your tactical net. Which of the following statements concerning nets is true? Resource nets are used to assign operators that become available. Health and welfare nets operate only on HF bands. NCS nets handle both formal and informal long distance messages. Tactical nets handle only formatted, which is true concerning nets. Resource nets are used to assign operators as they become available. Okay, moving on. These, I like these short ones. It makes it look like we're really making headway here. We were at 7A, we're going to 7B. And when we're done with this, you can take the test online on, or you can get ahead of it and get into it and at the ARRL and dig through it on your own and see where you can get to it. Introduction to emergency nets. What's the definition? A group of stations who gather on one frequency with a common purpose, and the net provides a structure and organization to allow an orderly flow of messages. That's your net. Net control station. The station in charge of a net and directing the flow of messages and general communications. That's your net control operator. Formal messages. Written messages that are sent in a standardized format. These are in several different ways, and we had covered the different kinds of formats and forms that we use when we were going over net controls. Informal or tactical messages, brief, verbal, or informal written messages intended for direct and immediate delivery. That's your informal or tactical. Traffic, that's a term referring to the messages sent over amateur radio, usually formal written messages, more generally any messages or activity on a particular frequency. That is traffic, any messages. And when you pass, you send a message from one station to another, you're passing a message. Third-party traffic, messages are transmitted on behalf of a person or organization other than a licensed radio operator. This term also applies when a person other than the licensed operator is allowed to use a microphone. Very often, third-party traffic is a big thing. When we had soldiers that didn't have their own way of getting messages through, during the Vietnam War and some others that followed, one time one of the local ham clubs set up in East Mall and took messages, third-party messages, to be passed on to people who were in the service at the time. And it was, at that time, it was the Central Pennsylvania Repeater Association that actually did that. And they would take the messages, write them down, and then on the ham radio, they would send the messages to stations across the globe until they got to where they were supposed to be. And a liaison station is the station responsible for passing messages between different nets, and that's how they traveled. Directed nets, the net control station controls all the activity. Check-in is to receive permission to be on. You have to check in. Open nets, control operators optional, and the NCS may step in to keep things orderly though. And the types of emergency nets, traffic nets or formal messages. NTS is a good example, National Traffic System. Tactical nets, on-site communications and monitoring and reporting is what they do. Resource nets manages the resources and logistics for the emergency that you're in. It could be resources, could be anything from personnel to equipment to medical supplies and so forth. Information net is usually an open one, and Skywarn's a good example of an information net. Checking into an emergency net. 2 times to check in, to join the net, and when you have messages, questions, or information. They're not chit-chat nets. They're there, you check in when you are needed. Directed emergency nets, the net control station asks for the check-ins by priority. Emergency or priority traffic, normal traffic, or relevant messages. Net control aid 1 with emergency traffic. These are examples of how someone would call in. Net control, this is aid 1 with priority traffic. or net control, they keep out, in order to minimize the words, you'll find that they very often don't say this is. Net control, aid 1 with emergency traffic, and so forth. Get used to, and in ham radio too, when you're calling someone, say their call first and then yours. Very often new hams get that mixed up. And the best way on ham radio, not in the emergency system, to become familiar with it, get into the habit of saying, this is, and then your call sign. I thought you were going to explode there. If you were only here with us, you would see all this. Checking into an emergency net. Open emergency net. Listen first, then ask for the NCS. If there's no NCS, proceed with good operating practices. Call another station and wait for the response. If there's nobody controlling it, act like there is and be responsible in what you're doing. Checking into an emergency net, if you're not part of the organization operating the net, before checking in, make sure that you have something to offer. All too many times during these drills that we do, somebody will jump in and say, I'm just hilltopping. I wanted to see if I could make it. No, we don't want to hear from you. Offer assistance, but do not insist on being included when you want to be part of it. Do not be too surprised if you receive a cool reception on your offer to help. Often that is because they assume you're not trained if you jump right in. EMCOM managers prefer to deal with the people they have known training capabilities and with whom they have worked before. That's very true. You may assign you as an apprentice, a logger, or a runner, and if you're given an opportunity, take it, because then that'll bring you in and you'll be able to learn more about how that particular operation works. But that's why we're looking for all the training that we can get on the air as well, to make sure that we're ready for this when it happens. Passing messages, the NCS net control station will ask for a list of traffic by priority. Then he may send you to a different frequency to handle it. He could ask the receiving station to call the sending station. He'll ask to connect, or he'll direct all traffic. Breaking the net. Usually it's used only for emergencies. Follow local procedures. You wait for a silence, say break, aid 1, and wait for the control station to call you. We hear a lot of people who used to come in from CB, every time they'd come on, they'd say break. That's not what it's meant for. Apparently on CB, break meant CQ or something. I'm not sure, but they would always come in and say break, break. Well, that's not what it means. This is used only in emergencies and only when you're trying to get an important message through. There again, no, don't say break, break, unless it's a critical emergency. That's important. And when you check out of an emergency net, once you are checked into a net, you're expected to be available until you check out. As a net controller or operator, if I'm calling somebody and they're not there, that's trouble, because you rely on those people being at those specific locations, and if they did not check out from the net, then you have a little trouble there. 3 reasons why to check out. Your location is closing, you need a break, or you've been relieved by another operator. Those are the 3 reasons. You sign off with your tactical sign, followed by your FCC call sign, and the net control operator will log you that way. Special. What?
Check out anytime you want.
You check out, but you can never leave. That's it. Special situations for checking out. If you're asked by someone in authority, such as a law enforcement officer, to move your station, then move immediately without argument. Don't say, but I got to take all these antennas down. No, you don't worry about that. Notify the National Net Control Station of the situation at the first opportunity you have. If you're requested by someone in authority to turn off your radio, and refrain from transmitting, do so immediately without question. Do not notify net control until you have permission to transmit again and can do so safely. There's usually a good reason for these requests. It may be an issue of security, maybe a potential hazard, such as an explosive device that could be triggered by RF energy. As a kid, we would travel a lot. We'd come along where they were working on roads and they said, do not transmit any radios. They were talking about ham radios and CBs and so forth and trucking radios because it would trigger explosives by accident. No, you don't see that so much. They don't do that. Levels of nets, local, regional, and national, liaison nets, and the NTS traffic systems. Non-voice nets, CW. I'm sure you all know what that is. Packet, UHF and VHF, MTOR, PACTOR, PSK 31 nets, all the digital modes, WinLink 2000, and D-Star. Well, this was written before they had all the rest of them. Fusion and DMR and all the rest. Well, D-Star, that's a DMR type, right?
Another format of digital modulation.
They have it in as non-voice. Practice, practice, practice. Anybody have questions or comments before we continue online or here? Oh, okay. Which following best describes a net? Group stations who purposely frequently the airways, a group of stations who gather on one frequency for a purpose, group of stations who occasionally meet on various frequencies, group of stations who are purposely meet at a particular time. That's an easy one. They have a purpose. Okay, there was a movie I thought about there, but there's a major difference between an open net and a directed net. On this one, the presence or absence of a full control by a net control station. Which of the following is true of a tactical net? This one is the net may be directed or open, but will usually have a net control station. Again, these were taken right out of the course. That's why these quizzes are in here. And when should you check into an emergency net? When you first join the net and when you have messages and questions. Not when you want to comment on something that somebody else said. You know, that's very annoying to a net control operator, I will say. And what should you do if someone in authority asks you to move your station? Do it. All right. Find my eyes again. And that was 7B. Is anybody bored yet watching these? Okay. We covered so much on net operation before with one of our previous, I was working with a net operating guide and felt that it was important to get everybody up to speed on nets. So some of this was covered in another format. The net manager is responsible for recruiting and training NCS operators, liaison stations, and other net members, sets up the net schedule, makes sure qualified net control stations are available, and arrange for relief operators and support services, and may be responsible for more than one net. I don't understand why they have John Travolta's picture there. Ringmaster, traffic cop, okay. He decides what happens in the net and when. The NCS decides when stations will check in, with or without traffic, and whether messages will be passed on the net's frequency or a different one. And it needs to be aware of everything going on around them or handle the needs of the net, its members, and served agency as quickly and efficiently as possible. And at this point, I would say, if you want to get some experience at this, we'll put you in if you want to volunteer to be net control station. We'll put you on the roster and give you a chance to get your feet wet. And the more practice you get, the better you'll be in an emergency. And if bad weather shows up and there's nobody running Skywarn, we're trained to do that at this point. And I use Skywarn as an example because that's where the emergencies usually begin. The NCS can be located anywhere, but it should be in a position to hear most, if not all, stations of the net. And at the EOC or command post is usually best. The NCS should not be responsible for the entire EMCOM operation. Net scripts. Many groups open and close their nets with a standard script. We have those on the nets that we do here. It lets the listeners know the purpose and format of the net. It ensures that the net will be run in a similar format regardless of who is a net control station. And they have different components. These are the components typically in them scripts. Those scripts identify the net control station and the net purpose, the priorities or the procedures for checking in, priority traffic, check-ins, and the closing of the net. And there are sometimes other things that are added to it. And if you listen to any net that is a net, they have a preamble that they'll talk about what all that is. The backup NCS is readily available if an equipment failure is a primary net control station and the primary NCS operator needs to take a break. So typically on these emergency ones, there's someone at the EOC and there's someone close to the EOC who can pick it up and go with it if needed. Two types, at the same location, there's a primary NCS and a different location. He maintains a duplicate log of everything happening on the net. So that's always important. Do's and don'ts of acting as a fill-in. Remember that although you're in control of the net, you are not God. Treat members with respect and accept suggestions from other experienced members. If you are taking over for an existing net, try to run it as much as the previous NCS did. Always follow a script if one is provided. Write your own if necessary, but keep it short and to the point. Handling messages in order of precedence, emergency, and priority traffic and welfare in that order. Acting as fill-in NCS, more basic do's and don'ts. Speak clearly in a normal tone of voice. Use good mic technique. Make all instructions clear and concise, using as few words as possible. Keep notes as you go along. Do not let your log fall behind. You got to keep everything in order. Write down which operators are at which locations. When one leaves or is replaced, update your notes. Ask stations to pass messages off the main net frequency when possible. And here in this county, we have a whole procedure set up for that. Radios that are programmed, and your private radios can eventually have a copy of that list, so you can program your own radios to be matching what we have, if you care to do so. All the reading and studying in the world will not replace the actual experience, so get involved in drills. Operators at various sites are responsible for messages going to and from their location, and they have to listen to everything that happens on a net. Maintain contact with the served agency. In other words, don't sit there and get daydreaming and looking at your cell phone and sending TikTok chats to everybody. Keep yourself involved. Assist the served agency with the creation of messages. Put them into appropriate format. Contact the NCS when they are ready to be sent. And ideally, this is true, very important, you should have 2 operators at each site. Bulletin stations, they relay these ARRL bulletins to those authorized by the served agency to all stations in a net. They may be transmitted on a preset schedule, such as at the top and bottom of the hour bulletins, and they must be located at the served agency or have a reliable communications link to them. As you hear these on the air, you'll understand the bulletins that come on. Liaison stations pass messages between 2 different nets as needed on a preset schedule. And a liaison station may monitor one net full-time, and when a message must be passed to another net, they leave the net temporarily to pass it, and then they return back to liaison net. The other net has a liaison station who does exactly the same thing, but in reverse. They look for you. A single liaison station may need to handle messages going both ways between two nets. They'll use two radios to monitor both nets at the same time. Real simple. Or in the case, then there are a lot of dual watch radios now. They're very handy in this. When one radio is used, you have to switch between the two nets on a regular schedule. But again, a lot of the radios have dual watch capability. That's where you use that. Relay stations will pass messages between two stations in the net that cannot hear each other, and it's not a regular net position. It's on an as-needed basis. If you can hear a station or stations that the NCS cannot, it's okay to volunteer and act as net relay. And here again, you'll often hear that the net control station is having trouble. Someone will say relay, and he'll say, go ahead, relay. And he says, and they'll usually come on and say, I hear him very well. And he'll take the message. The NCS will say, go ahead, take the relay. They'll take the message and then relay it back to the NCS. Very often, if you're sitting in another area, you're going to hear both of them. You're going to hear all of them. But the NCS operator cannot, and that's where a relay station comes into play. And these are simplex and HF. Typically on a repeater, if they can't hit the repeater, they can't hit it. But that's where these are on simplex, and on HF, you'll find relay stations. Workloads is if no operator should try to work excessively long hours, efficiency and effectiveness decline, and the served agency is not getting the best possible service. You have to make sure the net members get rest too, and on a regular basis. When it's a real emergency going on, people get tired. Monitor, this is shift changes, monitor the net for at least 15 minutes. Review the logs with the present operator before taking over, and continuity is the best thing. What they're saying is, before you take over, take 15 minutes at least and monitor the net with the one you're replacing and get the hang of it, and then review the logs from the present operator before you take over. That way it ensures consistency and continuity. In the non-voice modes, packet, FM packet, HF packet, and PACTOR, oh, no real packet then, huh? Provide an automatic connection between two stations. Packet does this, they're automatic. They transmit traffic using a bulletin board or a mailbox facility of the TNC. Now the mailboxes, there are a lot of these store and forward mailboxes in certain areas. We have them here in Harrisburg. You can leave a message on it, and the next person, when it's there, they check in, it'll download it to them. Automatically routed and stored without any action by the receiving station operator or an NCS. The packet modes work well. And I always joke with the people who are on packet now and ask them if they have a standard definition TV too, because it's such an old mode, but it's proven and works, has its place here in emergency communication. There are some non-packet digital modes, RIDI, PSK, 31, AMTOR, and GTOR. They're not automatic. They do require an operator to make them work. This one I know. CW procedures. It's clean, accurate code set at 10 words a minute is better than sloppy code at 30. Amen. If you're not used to sending CW, it's fun for me. I don't know if you guys like it or not, but it's send at the receiving speed you want. A lot of times people, they'll be able to send fast. So they'll send at 30 words a minute, and then they wonder why they can't read the stuff coming back to them. But that's because they think they're really good at sending, but you have to only send at the speed that you can receive. The pink cards, you don't want to get them. That's, I don't think they send them anymore, the ARRL pink cards. If you did something wrong, they would send them to you. And be consistent with abbreviations and pro signs. Interference problems, adjacent or co-channel stations who may be unaware of the emergency net, and you hear it all the time, you should be 3 kilohertz away from anybody else. Politely inform them that the net is in operation, ask for their cooperation. Ask an HF net to move away a few kilohertz, ideally 3K apart, which, let me go on that too. These people who come up with really cool ways of making their station sound really great by bypassing all the audio filtering and putting in all the stuff to have wideband audio, those are the people you really get angry with when you're running a net and they're 10 kilohertz away from you and they're still interfering with you because they think they're a broadcast station. We are limited to 3 kilohertz bandwidth, and typically a radio that's made will have a 2500 hertz cutoff so it does not splatter any farther. If the problem can't be resolved, have one or more alternate frequencies, and never discuss, acknowledge, or try to speak with an intentionally interfering station. Just in the same way that you don't acknowledge a kid acting out. When everybody raise kids, ignore them and they go away. And in the LA area radio jammer convicted, this is one of them in 06. These, there are a lot of these you can find. They will jam the radios, nets and so forth. They will be fined. And when they're caught, they are fined. They can be pretty stiff. And they can sentence you to prison if you are a bad operator and you refuse. It takes a while to get to that point, but they'll warn you many times before they actually throw in the slammer. And one of the areas where a lot of jamming was going on was 7.2 megahertz on the 40 meter band. Apparently that's cleaned up now. It's back to normal amateur use. So I used to hear a lot of that. And that's the end of this one. Anybody have comments online or in here on anything before we move on? It's getting a little late. I don't want to run these more than an hour usually, so we're getting to that point. Which of the following best describes the responsibilities of an NCS in an EMCOM operation? Answer is the NCS is responsible for all aspects of the net's operation. Acting as a fill-in NCS, which of the following practices should you avoid? And the last one is it. Ask stations to pass messages on the main net frequency when possible. You avoid that. Which of the following is true of a liaison? Multiple relay bulletins authorized by the agency at all stations. Liaison passes messages only in a preset schedule, handles messages only one way. The answer is the bottom one. The liaison station passes messages between two nets. Packet mode includes which of the following groups? And it is the first one, FM packet, HF packet, and PACTOR. If you're not familiar with them, do a little reading on them. They're interesting formats and find good use. There are a lot of different methods of digital transmission. I think packet is one of the simplest and easiest to get started with. Here's the NCS of a net involved in an EMCOM operation, and you notice that some other station is intentionally interfering with your net. Which of the following represents the best course of action? I'd say shut down and go home. Nope, it's move the net to an alternate frequency. If you can't resolve it, if they don't go out of the way, move it on. And that's the end of this one. And it's been an hour. Any questions, comments in here from anybody?